Inflation is a concept that is both prevalent and frequently misapprehended within the domain of economics. The predominant viewpoint on the subject is that inflation is simply a rise in prices. Alternatively, it has been proposed that it is the decline in the value of money. In reality, both phenomena occur simultaneously. The most elementary method of comprehending inflation is as follows. If the quantity of money that can be procured with one's salary has decreased, then inflation is being experienced. The increase in the cost of filling a grocery bag from $50 to only half of that amount can be used as an example of inflation in real life. The phenomenon under discussion can be attributed to three primary factors. The initial type of inflation under discussion is demand pull inflation. In circumstances where the demand for a product exceeds the supply, resulting in limited availability of the commodity, prices are prone to escalation. Contemplate a scenario in which a new game console is released with limited stock, yet it experiences significant demand. In the absence of a discernible decline in demand for the product, it is not incumbent upon the vendor to offer a reduced price. This phenomenon is known as demand-driven inflation. The second cause is cost-push inflation. In the event of an increase in production costs, companies are wont to raise their prices. In the event of a rise in the cost of raw materials, energy, transportation, or labor, it is inevitable that a broad spectrum of goods, ranging from bread to smartphones, will be subject to an increase in price. The elevated cost of production is ultimately transferred to consumers, resulting in increased expenditure. The third cause under consideration is that of monetary inflation, which is defined as the presence of excess liquidity in the economy. The sudden expansion of a nation's money supply, often referred to as printing money, can initially enhance individuals' perceptions of wealth. Nevertheless, this is frequently accompanied by a rapid escalation in prices, which results in an economic downturn. The impact of inflation on day-to-day life is a pervasive phenomenon that is often underestimated by the general public. Notwithstanding an increase in salary, in the event of inflation rising at a faster rate, a decrease in real terms will ensue. To illustrate this point, consider a scenario in which your salary increases from $2,000 to $2,100. However, if inflation is 10%, the purchasing power of that salary is effectively diminished. Savings are subject to the same process of devaluation. In the context of high inflation, a financial asset that has been deposited in a bank and earning interest at a rate of 5% per annum may, in effect, be worth less than it was prior to being deposited. Rising inflation has also been identified as a contributing factor to the prevailing uncertainty. It is evident that businesses are unable to engage in long-term planning due to the unpredictable nature of future events. Consequently, investment activity experiences a decline. It is evident that the entire economy becomes less stable. Furthermore, shifts in consumer behavior are also evident. It is a common misconception that consumers are motivated to make immediate purchases in order to avoid future price increases. However, this tendency to make impulsive purchases can, in fact, exacerbate inflationary pressures. With regard to the measurement of inflation, the majority of countries utilize the Consumer Price Index, otherwise referred to as the CPI. The index is based on a basket of goods purchased by the average person, and the difference in the cost of this basket from one year to the next is used to calculate the inflation rate. Inflation is not merely a numerical value, rather, it can be considered as a barometer of the health of the economy. Inflationary pressures, when minimal and consistent, facilitate economic stability, enable corporate strategizing, and engender a sense of security among individuals. However, during periods of elevated inflation, this can lead to a reduction in income, a weakening of savings, a distortion of decision-making processes, and a consequent destabilization of the entire system. However, it should be noted that inflation is not necessarily a negative phenomenon. Indeed, a modicum of inflation is regarded as beneficial for an economy. The majority of central banks seek to attain an annual inflation rate of approximately 2%. Why? It is evident that a modest degree of inflation has been demonstrated to have a positive correlation with increased levels of spending and investment. In the event of a gradual rise in prices, consumers are likely to exercise restraint in their purchasing decisions, rather than delaying purchases indefinitely. Consequently, businesses are becoming increasingly confident in their capacity to invest, hire, and expand. It is important to note that zero inflation, or deflation, when prices fall, can actually be far more dangerous. When consumers anticipate a decline in prices, they often defer their purchasing decisions, leading to a decline in current sales. They wait. Furthermore, during periods of peak demand, such as during the festive season, the economic impact is exacerbated, resulting in a slowdown of the entire economy. This has resulted in a decline in store sales, leading companies to curtail production and workers to face job losses, thereby exacerbating the downward spiral. Japan has grappled with this issue for decades. It is evident that elevated levels of inflation can be detrimental, yet a complete absence of inflation can also be deleterious. A further salient point pertains to the fact that inflation does not impact all individuals in an identical manner. Households with lower income are more affected by inflation, as a greater proportion of their budget is allocated to essentials such as food, rent, and transportation. In the event of a price increase, there is a limited capacity for adjustment. Conversely, individuals who possess assets, such as real estate, equities, or enterprises, frequently experience financial advantages during periods of inflation. In the event of a decline in the value of money, many assets have been observed to either increase in price or at least maintain their purchasing power in line with inflation. This assertion is frequently made by financial advisors, who emphasize that retaining a high proportion of one's wealth in the form of cash during periods of inflation can be a hazardous strategy. The value of cash is subject to decline. Assets have been shown to have a significantly higher probability of preserving or even increasing it. Furthermore, the psychological dimension of inflation frequently remains unacknowledged, yet its influence is profound. The phenomenon of inflation expectations has the capacity to precipitate inflationary trends in the economy. In the event that businesses anticipate an increase in prices in the forthcoming year, they may choose to implement price adjustments at the present time. In anticipation of an escalation in living costs, workers have historically sought wage increases. In the event of an increase in wages, companies are wont to raise prices in order to offset increased costs. This dynamic, known as the wage price spiral, is a recurring phenomenon in economic cycles. Consequently, central banks meticulously monitor not only real inflation, but also the public's perception of future inflation. Expectations have been shown to have a domino effect. It is evident that governments also play a significant role in the inflation narrative. A multitude of factors, including high public spending, tax policies, interest rate decisions, and even political uncertainty, have the capacity to influence inflation. To illustrate this point, consider a scenario in which a government operates with significant deficits and utilizes monetary expansion as a means of financing its operations. Under such circumstances, the likelihood of experiencing elevated inflationary pressures is considerably heightened. Maintaining low interest rates for an extended period can result in a decline in borrowing costs, a subsequent increase in spending, and an overheating of the economy. Conversely, excessive and premature increases in interest rates have the potential to precipitate economic downturns, commonly referred to as recessions. Achieving price stability is one of the most challenging issues for policymakers to address. If interest rates are increased too late, inflation may escalate. Conversely, if rates are increased too early, economic growth may be adversely affected. Furthermore, it is imperative to acknowledge that inflation does not manifest uniformly across different geographical locations. The higher incidence of inflation in developing countries is attributable to three key factors. Firstly, the exchange value of their currencies is less stable. Secondly, these countries rely more heavily on imported goods. Thirdly, their economies are more sensitive to global price changes. Conversely, developed countries characteristically possess robust institutions, advanced monetary policy instruments, and more predictable economic behavior. However, even these individuals are not immune to the effects of the disease. In the aftermath of the pandemic, even the most robust economic entities witnessed inflation levels that had not been observed for decades, a consequence of supply chain disruptions, labor shortages, and substantial stimulus expenditure. At this juncture, it is pertinent to consider the question of how individuals can safeguard themselves from the impact of inflation. While it is acknowledged that a perfect solution is not yet available, there are strategies that can be employed. Diversifying savings, avoiding excessive levels of idle cash, investing in assets that have historically performed well during periods of inflation, and understanding economic cycles are all recommended measures. Financial education has been identified as a significant tool in this regard, with the understanding of inflation enabling individuals to make more informed decisions, rather than responding impulsively. In conclusion, it is evident that inflation exerts a profound influence on various facets of economic activity, including the political landscape, individual financial well-being, and behavioral patterns. This phenomenon extends beyond the confines of mere economics. It is an all-encompassing force that permeates every facet of existence. Comprehension of the drivers of inflation, its evolution, and its impact on individuals and nations is a prerequisite for attaining a competitive advantage over the majority of the population. In the subsequent video, a more in-depth exploration will be undertaken into the manner in which nations combat inflation, with specific reference to interest rates, monetary policy, and government actions. The video will provide a rigorous evaluation of the efficacy of various strategies, distinguishing those that have been proven to be effective from those that are merely superficially appealing.